Now I'd like to start by paying tribute to one of these men here, the one who isn't made of wax. That's my pa, who has recently, what's that thing Shakespeare said? He's gone to join my mum in the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns. This is him back in '85 when we were on a trip on the Thames, and we went to a thing called the Royalty and Empire Museum in Windsor. It was in sort of half of the railway station. It was a Madame Tussauds thing all about Queen Victoria. In fact, there's me in more exalted company. That's Victoria, not Queen Victoria, but the Princess Royal. So you can see I'm a lot younger and hairier, but not so bearded. Now, it was Pop and Mom who started me down the road of loving wax museums. In the early 70s, they took me and my two brothers to a place called Louis Tussauds French Waxworks in Brighton. This picture, I have Facebook to thank for this. This picture, in fact, is from the late 70s. You can see here they're swanky about having John Travolta, but in fact, it was the same. The other thing was the same forever, which was this tableau of the pit and the pendulum. And it's not very easy to see, but there's a sort of swinging axe thing here. It wasn't Disneyland, but it was a bit sort of, animatronic, because this moved back and forth. And there's a guy here, you can't really see him, but he's lying across the length of the window. And when the thing swung away from him, his head would come up and he would look nervously down the window at the thing, and then his head would go down again as it moved back towards him. Now, if we just... interesting to note that this place was called Louis Tussauds.
Oh, don't worry, that was me.
Louis Tussauds. This was, I believe, a great-grandson of Madame Tussaud, who sometime in the Victorian period broke away from the family firm and started his own exhibition in Regent Street, which was presumably quite short-lived, because it certainly isn't there now. But he also licensed his name to various wax museums around the country and around the world. So according to the internet, there's still a Louis Tussauds Wax Museum in Bangalore in India. A few years later we went to another Louis Tussauds, ostensibly Louis Tussauds Museum in Great Yarmouth. This is actually celebrated as the worst wax museum in the world. I think it's great, and we'll be coming back to that. In the meantime, I went back to it many years later, but in the meantime, of course, I went to Madame Tussauds in London in 1976. I went with my granny for the first time, and Marie Tussaud used to claim that she actually modelled heads fresh from the guillotine. I'm not sure how true that is. I think she tended to exaggerate that kind of thing. But certainly she was around at the time before she came to England. And actually I took this on a later trip, but certainly these heads of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette had been in the exhibitions for hundreds of years, basically. I don't want you to think that I'm obsessed with gory things, because there were other people. Although here was a man who was certainly obsessed with gory things, Alfred Hitchcock, and also Hans Christian Andersen, who I've included because my brother Kerry, who's here with me tonight, he wasn't scared so much by things in the Chamber of Horrors, but you were a bit freaked out by Hans Christian Andersen, weren't you? Maybe it was his woolen trousers, knitted trousers. Very odd. Maybe they were all the rage at one time in Denmark. I don't know. He should really have written a fairy story about an enchanted pair of knitted trousers, surely. I think he missed a trick there. What's next? Oh, yeah. Tussauds have always led the field, I think partly because they've got well, they've always had the money, I suppose, to have an in-house department where they make their own stuff. Other people have third parties making them, and they tend to have to add sort of wigs and things like that. Whereas you'll see in their brochures, they always have a section where they show you how it's done. And here we see it. They're actually, with this one, because this is from the 70s, they're making Liza Minnelli. And they would have, like any portrait, they would have a sitting, hopefully. I think probably Hitler didn't do a sitting, but Liza Minnelli obviously did. And they'd take loads of pictures, do measurements and that kind of thing. And then they'll build an armature, decide on the pose, build an armature, and make a sculpture in clay. And from that, they will then make the mould, and the body would end up being made of fiberglass, but of course the head and the hands are made of wax. And they use the clay head to make the mould with plaster of Paris, and that would be in about 12 parts. And then they take it apart, rebuild it, and then pour in the molten wax. And then, here's the thing, every strand of hair is put into the warmed scalp individually, which is obviously quite a labour of love, and hopefully very well paid too. And there she is, taking shape, makeup and stuff. And there she was in the exhibition. And actually you can see Audrey Hepburn there in the background in the conservatory. Now, it didn't always work. I mean, I think the Liza Minnelli is great. They did a very good poster campaign. Here's a postcard I got at the time of here's a look at me, kid, it's Humphrey Bogart. But they've obviously used a picture of the actual Humphrey Bogart, because the one in the exhibition was not quite so good. On the other hand, sometimes they would absolutely hit the mark. This is Jean-Paul Marat after his assassination. Now, the French revolutionary people were really hot on propaganda. They were way ahead of the game, because they not only got Jacques-Louis David to come in and draw do a portrait, a painting from the festering corpse. They also got Marie Tussaud in to do a wax effigy, and that's one of I haven't been back for years, so I don't know if it's still there, but it was obviously there for a long time, and it's quite startlingly good, especially if you compare it to another one which we saw in San Francisco. Here we are, the Fisherman's Wharf Wax Museum. There's Marat. I find it fascinating that, what was her name? It's gone out of my head.
Corday.
Sorry? Charlotte Corday, thank you. She apparently has stabbed him in the chest, and yet no blood has spurted onto her virgin white dress. Fascinating. Also, what I like is the fact that there's this dresser there with nothing on it. Now, I wonder, is this just a bit of half-arsedness in the set dressing department, or where they make a point about Marat's apparently quite ascetic lifestyle? I guess we'll never know. Anyway, yeah, that was San Francisco. We actually went to another one, 1980. We went there on a family holiday with mum and dad and both my brothers. We also went to the Chinatown Wax Museum. Now, my favourite thing here was the assassination of Little Pete, who was this brutal Chinese gangster who was finally ambushed in a barber shop, and they had a tableau of that. But I couldn't find anything on the internet, so but I did manage to find this picture. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but that's from the Chinatown Wax Museum. Other wax museums I have visited include the Movieland Wax Museum. That was in Los Angeles. I'm quite proud of this picture I took of the outside. Not quite so proud of the picture I took inside of the set of the USS Enterprise. Let's be clear. Well, at least it's, you know, genuine. I could have just scanned the souvenir brochure and given you something really good instead of this piece of tan. But never mind. And there's Osborne Smiths on the Isle of Wight. It used to be located in supposedly the most haunted house on the island, certainly one of the oldest. Proper creepy it was. And my favourite thing here was the thing of there was a legend of a lady who apparently died, and they put her in a coffin, and it turned out that she wasn't dead after all. Whether there was actually a skeleton playing the organ or not, I don't know, but it was that's what made it for me. What else? Louis Tussaud strikes again. This was in Copenhagen, which I went to about 10 years ago, something like that. And the best thing in here was the Hall of Artists. You see people like Van Gogh, and I think that's probably Gainsborough, Dali, Toulouse-Lautrec, and here's possibly your man himself, Da Vinci, and Mona Lisa. And you see what they've got is everyone's done like a version of the Mona Lisa in their particular style. That was very good. Now, what's the connection between all these things? They're no longer there. They've all closed down, along with places like the Friargate Wax Museum in New York. Come on, behave. Louis Tussaud's Shakespearean exhibition in Stratford-upon-Avon, the Edinburgh Wax Museum, and the Royalty and Empire, which I mentioned at the beginning. The funny thing about that is that was actually a Madame Tussauds thing, which is also no longer there. Now, when I did a version of this talk in Brighton, during the Q&A session, it turned out that someone in the audience had actually worked at this place in the 80s, and he told me that even an organisation like Madame Tussauds is not above kind of recycling stuff, because with this Guard of Honour was a cast of dozens at least, and it's expensive to make all those heads and stuff. So apparently they did cannibalise some of the figures that they decided they didn't want to use anymore from the London exhibition. And apparently somewhere in here was a guardsman with the head of Marilyn Monroe. But it's quite unusual. This eventually went the way of all wax, because it was, as I say, in part of the Windsor railway station, and the railway people wanted it back eventually, apparently, so they got their marching orders, which would be unusual for the Tussaud organisation, who are usually used to being the ones calling the shots. But I had wanted for many years to see the Louis Tussaud Wax Museum in Blackpool. When I finally got there, they'd been taken over by Madame Tussaud. And here's me with David Beckham, of course. I'm not sure my picture does it justice, how good it actually is, because all the figures in the place are absolutely amazing. I mean, they're so good that it was actually a little bit boring. Funnily enough, I don't know if they still got this there, but there came a point in the exhibition when you're going around where, quite unannounced, there was a set of shelves with some old heads, presumably from the previous exhibition. And there's Frank Sinatra, Ozzy Osbourne, there's Whoopi Goldberg, I think that's Judith Chalmers there, Mr. T, that's Lane Page, if I'm not mistaken. And this is Charlie Caroli. Who here remembers Charlie Caroli? Yeah, exactly. Yes, Right Charlie was his TV show in the early 70s. Right, children! Right, Charlie is what they would say. Thank you. And he was, in fact, the star clown for many years at the Blackpool Tower Circus, and I think it a real shame that Madame Tussauds should have thought that he was no longer worthy of being in the... he was probably dead by then for years and years, but even so. So for me, I would sacrifice a bit of quality for a bit of heart and soul, personally, when it comes to wax museums, and you have to be committed to that idea when it comes to the place in Great Yarmouth. The tabloids used to have fun every so often when it was a bit quiet on the news front. People like the Daily Mail would do a centre spread saying, "Hey, there's this crap waxworks in Norfolk. See if you can tell who these people are." And now, I'm an actor, and there's been some debate recently about do we need critics, and critics are too harsh, blah, blah, blah. I sort of think that if you put your head above the parapet and you ask people to pay money to see you do something, and you've got to take the slings and arrows. That said, I eventually met the lady who ran this place, and she was very genuinely hurt by this kind of stuff. So I sort of see both sides of the argument. Here's some more of the... This was actually in the Daily Mail. My dad saved it for me when this was I think the year after I went, and they were going to close down. I think that's fairly obviously Neil Kinnock, although he does look a bit like Vladimir Putin as well. But Putin was a bit later. I mean, clearly that's obviously face ache. Mussolini, yeah, he's a bit tanned, but he is from Italy, isn't he? Let's face it. That's obviously Joan Collins, so I think they protest too much to these people. Anyway, little story about the House of Wax in Great Yarmouth. In the year 2011, I had a bit of corporate acting work, which involved a series of little sort of paid working holidays, essentially, at centre parks around the country. And because it was to do training stuff for Sainsbury's. And it involved being partnered up with a female actor and then having to do these things where you'd go on and repeat these true stories about bad management. And we'd do, sometimes it would be just sort of 5 minutes of actual performing a day, and then we'd have the day to ourselves. Anyway, I was working with a lady called Jenny Rowe, and we got on quite well. And on a particular day, I said to her, I want to do this audio radio documentary about the decline of the English waxwork. And so I've arranged to go to Great Yarmouth. I should have said, by the way, that we were in Sherwood Forest near Nottingham. And so I've arranged to go to Great Yarmouth to interview this lady, Jane Hayes, about her wax museum. And of course, the truth is that Great Yarmouth isn't that much nearer to Nottingham than it is to Brighton. So it was very much a labour of love to drive across to 2.5 counties to go and do this thing. Anyway, I said, you can come with me if you want. And she said, no, that's okay, I'll stay here and do some work. I went, fair enough, which is quite like me, but never mind. Anyway, so off I went into Lincolnshire, which, no offence to any Lincolnshireans here, but it's not the... yeah, even on a good day, but on a day when it was drizzling constantly, it was quite demoralising. But anyway, I got there to the House of Wax, Louis Tussauds House of Wax in Great Yarmouth, and in deference to Jane, who was used to people coming in and taking pictures and then putting them on the internet and saying, this is crap, isn't it? I didn't take any pictures except this one, which was fair game because it was in a cabinet out the front. But obviously this is Laurel and Hardy. And I also took a picture of me in front of it. Now this was going to be the picture that would be in the Radio Times when they broadcast my documentary. But obviously that didn't happen. I did the interview with Jane, and I went and got very wet on the beach, and then I set off back to Sherwood Forest. And it turned out that Jenny, even though I got back after 9 o'clock and all the restaurants were about to shut, she had actually not had dinner. She'd waited to have dinner with me, which I thought was an encouraging sign, and indeed it was, because we started going out shortly after that, and we ended up getting wed. But we hopefully we're eventually actually going to find somewhere to live together, which would be good. But anyway, the point is, I didn't manage to save the English waxworks, or the English independent waxworks, because Tussauds are doing okay. But I did at least find someone to go to waxworks with me when we could find them. In fact, this is us in Dublin. You have to go to Dublin to find waxworks these days. And It seems as if we deliberately colour coordinated for this room here, this writer's room in the Dublin Wax Museum. It's just coincidence. And but here we are with Brendan Behan, who's sort of okay, and an absolutely extraordinarily lifelike Samuel Beckett here. So that's it basically, and thank you.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you so much, Robert. Was there ever a waxworks in Eastbourne? There was nothing? Because you mentioned Brighton. I
Yeah.
think,
Not as far as I know.
No. Anybody know if there was one in Eastbourne? Yeah, no. Any questions for Robert? Anyone else? There we are at the back. Yes, Ted.
Have you ever been tempted to try and buy a waxwork, or do you own any? Or
I don't own any. I don't. Dave Bramwell, who does the Catalyst Club in Brighton, when I talked about this subject there, he brought in a pair of wax feet, which he got from a guy who made stuff for Madame Tussauds. I thought they did it all in-house, but it does seem that they sometimes have people who they commission to do stuff from outside. I can't remember whose feet they were. There was someone famous. This isn't much of a story, is it? But anyway, what is the story? No, I don't own one. I did once try to make one, a miniature one. I actually got as far as making a mould from a head of an action man. I think it was a G.I. Joe, actually, and using sort of bandages dipped in plaster of Paris. And I got as far as I did actually make the head out of wax, but I didn't really get as far as making the whole body. But yeah.
Any other questions for? Yes.
why wax?
Why wax, indeed? Why do I like wax?
No, why not some other material?
That's a very good question. I suppose it has a higher melting point than chocolate. I really don't know the answer to that. Oh well, I suppose. I suppose it's easier to make a wax model of someone than to get someone to make them in stone or something like that. Although you could argue that if Tussauds' process involves making a sculpture of the person, why not just paint the sculpture? And I don't really know the answer to that. Possibly it's that because Madame Tussaud, when she started out, I believe for many years she had a touring exhibition, and maybe, things made of wax are going to be lighter to cart around than things made in stone. Maybe it's something to do with that. Don't know.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for the question, Spike. Any other? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously the demise of the Wax Museum. Would you have any inkling as to why? And if so, what's replaced it?
I think that, it's difficult. It is difficult to unstick anyone from their sofa these days to leave the house and do anything. And hats off to everyone who's actually unstuck themselves from their sofa tonight to come and see this. But it's I don't know. I will have the same thing. Doing a show on Saturday, and often wonder why I do it, because there's so much indifference out there to be struggled against. But you've got to do something before you die, I suppose. I can't remember what the original question was.
The demise of the wax.
Yeah. Well, it's weird, isn't it? Because the Tussaud empire seemed to be going from strength to strength, and yet all these little ones sort of fall by the wayside. Maybe it's because they're not as good, and maybe most people, like me, don't take pleasure in the ones that aren't so good.
Maybe, with cinema as well, maybe it's that we don't need to suspend disbelief so much as perhaps we would have done before, with cinema, it's obviously,
Yeah, I think when Madame Tussaud was first doing her stuff, people, weren't constantly seeing photographic images of people there to take her word for it that Voltaire looked like this or whatever, because most people wouldn't have known. I don't know.
That's a good point. And oh, sorry, did you have a question?
My question was how interesting was that journey from Nottingham to and can you actually think of any interesting landmarks that you saw there?
In Lincolnshire, there are a lot of fields, but can't remember any. But I don't have a particular.
It's flat, isn't it? It's very flat.
Yes, very
Yeah,
flat.
It's very
I
flat.
don't have a
Yeah.
favourite field.
And so, yeah, there was a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask. These days, you can print a 3D heart, in 3D.
Yes. So I
So
understand.
presumably, people who need models for films or whatever can make this stuff very easily. So I guess the craftsmanship is sort of devalued.
Could be. Yes.
I mean, if they could do a scan of your whole body, could they print the whole body?
I suppose they could, but maybe that comes back to the thing I was saying about the models at the Blackpool Museum being so good that they were a bit dull, And what is it that I want from a wax museum? I don't know. I think it's not necessarily verisimilitude. I suppose the thing I like is they're always a bit creepy, and possibly if they're a bit crap, maybe they're more creepy. There was when we went to the one in Great Yarmouth the first time, the thing that really stood out for me was, in fact, the thing where there was no likeness, because they'd very cleverly used, there was a staircase behind a locked sort of grill, which went up, and at the top of the staircase was a figure, and you could only see their legs, and that was Jack the Ripper. Proper creepy.
Wow. Well, there we are. I think on that note, can we thank Robert for a fabulous performance?